Just think of all the opportunities to learn new things, find new friends, and do it all in the blink of an eye. Introducing Blink, Bluff's Community Wi-Fi. It's free, and it's coming to your neighborhood soon. Learn more at blinkwifi.org.
Are we good?
Okay, go ahead.
All
You
right.
have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is quoted as saying, "Speak your mind even if your voice shakes." So standing in front of you, I'm sure you're going to hear my voice shake, as this is something I have never done. But it's important that I speak. If you ask my colleagues, many would be surprised that I'm up here speaking to you. While I want to be made for this, I'm finding it more and more difficult to be. I had the privilege of attending the last school board meeting. Sadly, of the 16 years that I've been an educator in Council Bluffs, last week was my first, but obviously it won't be my last. This is my 26 years as a teacher. My first 10 years of teaching were in alternative education settings. I'm telling you this as I have never regretted those years until this year. Those settings did not have a retirement plan, so basically I'm behind those years for retirement. You see, if I wouldn't have done those years, I think this would be my last year, as I'd be done with teaching. I know each of you have careers of your own, and I don't know what you guys do, as I've not had a conversation with any of you about your work expectations. So I'm here today to give you insight into my work expectations. The demands of the district has put on us are close to being impossible unless you take an enormous amount of precious time away from family and any pursuits outside of school. I thought last year was difficult, as increasing 2 additional classes meant 50 to 60 additional students that I taught, and the reduction of our planned period by 20 minutes each day required many hours outside of contract time. This year, the hours needed to complete content material for 3 different groups of students. The on-site, remote, virtual academy each day is immense, not including the time to complete all the required special education paperwork and having to cover classes when we don't have enough substitutes. I write each day around 6 a.m. and rarely do I ever leave prior to 4:30 or 5 p.m. and often staying longer. I have never spent so many hours on the weekend doing school-related tasks, but I need to in order to get everything completed. What am I working on? I'm completing my special education paperwork. I'm modifying the general education curriculum for my special education students while keeping the content rigorous. I'm doing lesson plans. I'm filling out a lesson plan form that takes me hours. I'm grading papers. I'm trying to keep up with the technology requirements to teach all 3 groups of students. And I'm constantly changing seating charts as students are allowed to move through on-site, remote, and virtual academies somewhat fluidly. We just completed our 7th week with students, and I honestly feel like I've taught 2 years straight with no time off. My self-care is non-existent, but I'm trying hard to niche out a little time each week. It seems like all I'm doing is school-related, and it's taking a toll on me mentally, emotionally, and physically. Honestly, it feels traumatizing, and I'm not minimizing trauma, as I do understand what trauma is. I've taken the ACE quiz, and I know what my number is. In a school district that prides itself on trauma-informed care, myself and many of my colleagues are suffering to the demands of this year. I'm also seeing marriages of families, my colleagues being negatively affected. It's painful to hear colleagues tell me that they feel like they are not a good spouse and parent because they're spending so much time at home on school tasks. Again, being made for this is nearly impossible when it comes to work-life balance. Having Monday, October 5th without students and our meetings until 2 p.m. was very helpful, but it seems too little too late. I'm also concerned about the safety, excuse me. I'm also concerned about my safety and especially the safety of my 77-year-old mother, who my sister and I are caregivers for. My sister also works for the district. My mom is a kidney cancer survivor, is currently in kidney failure, and is also a diabetic. Offering 5 days on-site means I have larger groups of students in my classroom, so being socially distanced is impossible, and the hallways are really crowded. This increases the chance of being exposed to COVID-19. The mass crediting makes no sense to me, especially since it's something that is not recognized by the Centers of Disease Control, or at least the research I've done, I haven't found it to be. I do not pretend to know about the medical field, but it seems like if the CDC doesn't recognize mass crediting, then why would a state and a school district recognize it as a best practice? I do want to point out that I feel safer coming into this board meeting now than in my own classroom. In here, chairs are all 6 feet apart, and you guys all have little barriers between each of you guys. If mask crediting works and each of you before me are wearing masks correctly, why aren't there additional barriers between you? Shouldn't wearing the mask correctly be enough? Myself, the staff, and students in the district should be valued as much as each of you and have the same protections as you. In closing, I hope each of you really know how hard the staff of Council Bluffs School District are working and how dedicated we are to our students, often at a heavy personal cost. If you're unsure, come visit us. Engage in a conversation of the reality that we're in. Come see what the incredible workforce is doing in spite of all this being asked of us, and realize we're drowning in our workload. We love our kids, and that's why we continue to battle on, even though we are not made for this. I appreciate you guys listening to me.
Thank you. Next, Sherry Anderson. Are you here, Sherry? Asked to speak to the board. Okay. And Bob Hanson? I know I saw Bob earlier.
Hi, Bob Hanson, 1395 Ardmore Street. I teach at AL, been here for 25 years. I'd just like to say here for what Lou had to say. She did a great job. My question is a little bit different. My uncle taught at TJ for 40 years, and before he died, he asked me to track down the Abraham Lincoln Canon. So, years ago, I know it's a little funny, but years ago, I think this was back in the 30s, someone bequeathed an authentic Civil War canon to Abraham Lincoln High School. When I started, the canon was there. Somehow it got appropriated by a private citizen in Council Bluffs, which we don't know who that is. He used it and was paid for having it in the movie The Gettysburg. And if you remember the scene where the cannon fuselage starts before the Pickett's charge, it's in that scene. I've asked our athletic director and the admins around our building if they have any idea where it is. There's no paperwork, nobody knows where it is. I just want to know, does the district have any idea where it is? I think it's a valuable object that we shouldn't have just let out of our hands, and I would certainly like to see if someone could find out where it is. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I've not heard of that either. Are there any other members of the public that wish to address the board at this time? Seeing no movement to the podium, we will move on to our next agenda item, the superintendent's report. Dr. Merlot?
Yes, thank you, Mr. LaFurla. Our first report of this evening will be Dr. Vorthman will come to the podium and present to the board our 1920 ACT results.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Murillo. It's my pleasure tonight to share some preliminary data with you regarding the ACT and the results from the class of 2020. Before we begin tonight, I want to provide a little bit of background information and a few notes about the results of the ACT. Typically, we bring you this report usually in mid to late October, and it usually is embargoed prior to the release to the Board of Education. This year, things are a little bit different. ACT has not yet released the data that they typically provide for the graduating class. However, they have released the data to individual school districts. So there's an online portal now. We can grab our own data. And so thanks to the magic of Dr. Shudak, we were able to pull all of our graduates out, and we know how our kids did for the class of 2020. So what we don't know tonight is how our kids did compared to either the state or the nation. That data has not yet been released and should be coming in the coming weeks from ACT. So look for a press release from ACT about that data. The last thing I wanted to mention is that really the college admission process in general is changing rapidly, and it certainly isn't the college admission process that maybe you're familiar with or maybe your son or daughter is familiar with. And COVID certainly has accelerated the changes that have taken place in post-secondary. So I wanted to draw that point because a recent report by the Washington Post that looked at kind of some changes that had taken place since the COVID-19 pandemic noted that in their research, nearly 60% of all U.S. colleges and universities no longer require the ACT. It's either optional or not required at all. And so we have to kind of pause for a second and ask ourselves, what does this data mean? And how does it inform us or instruct us about how our students are doing? If you go back to the goals that we had set As a school district, goal 2, you'll remember, is to make sure that all of our graduates are future ready. ACT certainly is one of those indicators among others that we use to help know and improve on our readiness for college coursework. So tonight, I have the pleasure of giving you some really good information, which is always much more fun than giving you bad news. But tonight is really, really good news. What we did see this year, you'll notice on the bottom here, this is the percentage of all of the students in the graduating classes for the last 9 years, from the class of 2012 to the class of 2020 on the bottom, who have taken the ACT. And one thing I want you to notice here is kind of this general decline that we've seen, kind of a peak of around 52%, about half of our kids taking the ACT, and then this year down to 38%, which was an increase over the previous year. But if you superimpose over top of this the percentage of students who are attending a four-year school after graduation, it almost mirrors the same track. So what we do see is that the number of students who take the ACT, for the most part, mirror the percentage of students who enroll in a four-year school. That should make sense to us, as many of them are requiring the ACT or encouraging the ACT as an admissions test. But you'll notice the last 2 years, in 2019 and 2018, that number has started to go down. And we see that kind of hit a low of the number of four-year college-going students in 2019. And we'll certainly have some 2020 data here at the end of November. So even though enrollment has gone down, what we have noticed is that we maintain relative equity among subgroups for students taking the ACT. So what you'll notice on this chart is the teal bar represents the percentage of the graduating class that specific group made up. The orange bar represents the percentage of that group that took the ACT. So what you'll notice here is that both whites and African American students are slightly overrepresented in their percentage that are taking the ACT. Asian students are also slightly overrepresented. But our Hispanic students are slightly underrepresented. They make up about 13% of the graduating class. Only about 12% of them took the ACT. So we're pretty comparable when you look at the way that this chart lays it out. A little bit of a difference is kind of accentuated, but really we're pretty much in line with what we see as the demographic makeup of our schools and our graduating classes is pretty much manifested in the ACT test taking among subgroups as well. It could be. Many of our students do take it more than once. Certainly in their junior, senior year, that becomes kind of the rite of passage, I guess. So here's another piece of great news. This is the average composite score. So you remember that ACT is a culmination of multiple subtests that are scored on the scale of 1 to 36, 36 being a perfect score. And this chart shows the past 9 years, what the average ACT score was for students in the Council of School by graduating class. So for the class of 2020, the average composite score district-wide was 20.9, and that's a 9-year high in our school district. So certainly something that is worthy of celebration. Our students are continuing to make gains, not only on the ACT composite score, but on the subtest, which I'll show you here in a minute. When we look at that through the lens of equity, what we want to see is, do we have comparability between racial subgroups as well? And what you'll notice is they're pretty much centered around where we were. We don't see any huge disparity among racial groups. In fact, all students all the way on the left, the average score was 20.9. Our white students, 21.1. Our multiracial students, 21.7. Hispanic is slightly lower, 19.7, but Asian students way above that at 24.3. So we're generally right around the average, and we don't see huge dips or huge jumps between racial subgroups in ACT scores. So I'm going to roll through these pretty quickly because you're going to see a theme. But when we look at the actual subtests, so there are 4 of them on the ACT, math, English, reading, and science. What you'll notice on all 4 of them is that we made gains, and all 4 of them are 9-year highs. So in math, our average score was 19.6, which topped the previous high score of 19.3, so 0.3 of a point increase in math over the 2013 score. The same was true in English. 20.6 was the average score. That was a 9-year high. That was again bested with the 2016 score. Reading was 22.7. That is above and beyond anything that we had seen in the past by quite a bit. The previous high score was 21.8, so almost a full point increase in English, or in reading, 9-year high. And then lastly, in science, 21.6 was the average, which was quite a bit, over a half a point higher than the previous high in 2016. Once again, a 9-year high. So all of these kind of tell the same story. We weren't sure what to anticipate, given that there was some changes in testing dates last year due to COVID. But for the most part, our students scored extremely well when we look at the high school seniors, high school graduating seniors for ACT. And with that, I would answer any questions you might have about ACT scores.
Questions from the board?
So I guess, so while fewer like 4-year schools are taking the ACT classes, and then I know the big push has been that we've increased our number of 2-year university students. Do we see like a trend in those scores going up if students are thinking that they'll be going to a 4-year university, and so those students might have a different plan just academically in general, or what do you think that might look like for us?
I think let me go back here to a few slides. If you look at that historical test taker data, I think you'll see that not only is it pretty much in line with the 4-year school, but I think a lot of students felt pressured to take the ACT because it was more of an expectation that if you're going to college, you have to take the ACT. And so there probably were a fair number of students who maybe weren't sure if they were going to post-secondary, but wanted to go ahead and take the test to make sure that they had it under their belt if they were. And I think what we've seen as enrollment trends have changed in the post-secondary landscape, more and more students are more certain about what their post-secondary plans are going to be, especially with the partnerships that we have with our local community college, Iowa Western, the D+1 programs. Kids know ahead of time where they're headed in that year 13. And so you're likely seeing the 35% last year, the 38% test takers this year are more likely kids who know they're headed to the 4-year school that needs the ACT in order to meet admission requirements.
I guess, like, despite having some uptick in the number of test takers, really numbers jumped quite a bit this year. Do we have anything where we say that, we were really focused on this, just overall?
I think our map
rigor in
data
academics?
shows. I think our map data set shows the same picture, which is great. That's what we want to see, is the ability to triangulate these data pieces. Any one piece by itself is a little dangerous sometimes and misleading, but you get 2 or 3 or 4 pieces, and you can kind of start putting a puzzle together in the picture. We know that we really doubled down on mathematics in the last couple of years, especially at secondary level. We had some curricular changes. Teachers have received a lot of professional development. Teachers have worked extremely hard on mathematics at our middle and high schools. Our elementary curriculum was changed as well, which will be a lagging indicator. But I think that has a lot to do with why we're seeing some real nice increases, especially what you saw in mathematics.
Great.
That trend of 4-year colleges and universities dropping the ACT really started several years ago. I'm wondering if now, are you starting to see new trends in the college admissions process for those 4-year colleges and universities, and what our guidance offices might be doing differently?
Some universities have said that they won't even accept it. They don't even want you to send it, which I think is probably the general trend. It became optional, and now it has even in some selective institutions, Cal Poly just recently said, we're not going to take it this year, and we're not going to take it next year either, so don't even bother sending them to us. And I think that has a lot to do with colleges it being more competitive, number one. The higher education landscape is, the pool of eligible students is somewhat small, and everybody's clamoring to get them. I think that's one of the issues. Two, you have the pandemic, and a lot of kids stayed closer to home or stayed home, or if they were going to be learning online, why wouldn't I do it from my home where I'm safe, where my parents are, rather than going off to school? And I think you couple that with kind of a reemergence of a holistic look at a student's performance, that no single test score defines what a student is what their potential is. And you have to remember the ACT is a predictor of a predictor. So all those ACT scores are hopefully predicting how well a freshman will do in those entry-level courses. And the reason they choose that is because those entry-level courses are traditionally a predictor of how likely they are to persist to a sophomore year and then persist on to a degree completion. So anytime, I think somebody told me this a long time ago when we were talking about college admissions process, Mr. LaFurla, anytime you're using a predictor of a predictor, you kind of have to be careful.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true of the ACT.
And I just haven't been paying much attention to those things over the last few years, but, I know that the studies at that time were very strongly indicating that high school GPA was a much better predictor of success in college. And I just wonder if now colleges and universities are publicly saying, we are weighting your high school GPA heavier than we were before. So your GPA matters, your grades in your high school courses do matter. But I don't know, and I haven't been paying attention to those things.
Internally.
Yeah.
That, GPA is certainly a better predictor of a student's course load, usually, a student's ability to motivate and persist through. But there are lots of other indicators as well.
Right. Any other questions? Ms. Shudak, did you have any questions? I just want to make sure we include you.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Borthman. At this time, I've asked Ms. Smith and Mr. Schultz if they would put together our informational presentation tonight, really just providing an update on students returning to on-site school 5 days a week. And so, Dr. John, get your slides ready. Okay, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for having us here tonight to talk a little bit about our returning with our kids back on site. It's absolutely different feel in the building right now. It's a little bit louder than it was a week ago. It's a little more crowded than it was a week ago. It's great to see kids back in the seats though, and they seem to be excited to be there. There's still a lot of cautionary feelings that are going out there, but I think overall the idea of educating our kids face to face is where the heart of most people are. So, of course, we have pictures for you. We always have pictures for you, right? But first, we're going to go over a little bit of the data about who's here and who's choosing something different. So as you look at this slide, the first 3 lines in there represent 100% of the kids who are attending our schools. So they're either attending hybrid, on-site for 5 days, or in virtual academy. You can see as you go across, it varies different between elementary, middle school, and high school about the kids who chose to stay in hybrid versus the kids who chose to come back 5 days a week. You'll see virtual academy really is about the same all across all grade levels with looking at that. So with that, the bottom 2 lines that are on there really takes the kids who are on site either in their Tuesday, Thursday, every other Monday schedule or their Wednesday, Friday, every other Monday schedule. So it takes all of the kids who are in the 5 days and about half of the kids in hybrid depending on their day. So really, when you look at that in the elementary level, we have about 80% of our kids, of our total population, on site at elementary. Roughly 73% of our kids at middle school are back on site on a daily basis, and about 67 at high school are back on a daily basis with that. So that's our out of our full capacity of students. Okay. So the pictures, Mark. This is
Yeah. So Mrs. Smith told you that we've got some more pictures. We always have pictures, and we will always have pictures. We love pictures. So as you look at the pictures tonight, I want you to look for the things that we've been talking about all year. In our return to operations manual, we focus on mask wearing. It's the expectation that students and staff wear masks at school. You'll look for some physical distance when it's practical. You'll look for directionality in some of the photos on how you're seeing students are traveling through the school. And you may even see some sanitizing equipment and some bottles, because those are some key strategies that we are using to ensure that our students and staff are safe at school. So I'm going to click through the photos and have you look at those now that you know what you're looking for. Start here. See here, it's beginning of the day. Students are arriving and waiting for their teacher to pick them up. Very welcoming in our buildings. You're seeing elementary, you're seeing middle, you'll see high school. Here's some classrooms. Look for Czar, see if you can see him there. You might even see some owl cameras in there too.
not asking you to count this time.
Even though I know Miss Shudak got it right last time. You can see a variety of pictures here. You can see the whole group, kids on the floor with the teacher. You also see students collaborating. They're wearing masks and they're working together. Mrs. Smith and I were able to get into schools yesterday and today, and also had a few of our principals share some photos with us. You can see the different levels and what it looks like. All right, next Mrs. Smith's going to talk about a little bit about what it looks like at lunch.
Sure. Actually, it'd be kind of looking for the same things, but one of the things you'll notice at lunch at the secondary level, this is a picture up at Kern, but all 4 secondary buildings are doing similar things, is we've expanded the space for lunch while trying to keep the lunch the number of students at a table smaller still. And so you can see here on the picture on the left is the cafeteria at Kern. The picture on the right is the gymnasium. So each building has a second designated spot. We had extra tables, and we're setting that up so we are still able to spread kids out at lunch as much as possible. And you're going to see very similar things at the elementary, where under typical normal circumstances, there's twice as many kids at a table as there are right now. So, and you of course can still see the barriers in between kids across the table, and how kids are just kind of automatically learning how to walk 6 feet apart as they're entering and exiting the cafeteria with looking at that. We also have a requirement for any guests coming into our building that they too must follow our mitigation strategies of using sanitizers when they come in and wearing masks at all time when they're around students. So with that, can we answer any questions for you?
Are there any questions from the board?
How much plastic are we using now between all these schools? Just curious, those rolls.
50 questions.
Is it 1 million miles yet? I'm just curious now.
Well, we ordered enough. That plastic is what you wrap it So at first when we placed our order, the company thought they were
Hmm.
said maybe we were looking at sell it over, you know.
I'm curious what the price of plastic wrap as a protective device is compared to as a pallet wrap. It's probably triple the price or something.
It was a lot cheaper to go this way. It was our cheapest route.
I guess I did have a question more about the teachers themselves. And I don't know how much we can share, we kind of on the, are we seeing sharing or people getting COVID within the schools? Or is it tracing back to homes and relatives and such?
Mr. Milborn and his team have done a really good job of tracking the employee by Matt Wyatt. Figure out where the spreads are. So Mr. Arthur asked, where we have
So I've been tracking the employees, and Mr. Hamilton tracks students closer than I have. All the cases that we're contact tracing and following so far have been linked back to community spread. So it is someone in the house, a spouse, a partner, a child, or it's been all reported to us through weekend activities. So I've heard sports, I've heard restaurants, I've heard a lot of family gatherings, weddings, funerals, those types of things. So as we track that and try to, continue looking for that idea, are there hot spots? We're not seeing that in one place as of yet. We're just seeing it coming from the community.
Okay.
Mr. Hamilton had a report on our students. As Mr. Hamilton comes, when I called Matt on Monday, which is usually the beginning of the week, is my first phone call, we did still, the average was high, which was a concern to me. And we had 20 from the men's shelter, we had 30 in a private school. And then the rest of the new cases really pointed out it was 30 to 50 years, where we're really struggling with getting them to wear their mask, getting them to be careful when they're out in social gatherings.
Yeah, I would echo what Mr. Milborn said as far as what we're seeing in students. Obviously, we're quarantining students from exposure at school, but as far as COVID positive cases, it's coming from outside of the school and from community spread. We're not seeing spread within our district, and we're not seeing really any pattern as far as hotspots or any particular schools. It seems to be the cases we're seeing seem to be spread amongst the schools as well.
So kind of reasonably sure what we're doing so far in the schools is dampening the ability to spread this within our buildings. I think that's probably a lot of people's main fears is, are we getting the results that we think we're getting by all the sanitizing, the cleaning, and the trying to socially distance right now in schools, even though we're bringing back more staff? It sounds like the answer is yes.
I would agree with that, yes.
Thank you.
Question about the numbers. 50%. And 16% were assuming the virtual numbers.
We've had, not much. We did have some families request to come back because kids were struggling, and we allowed that when kids were really struggling at home, and we don't want to lose their year of learning or anything, or their semester of learning. So we've allowed some kids to come back from virtual. You will notice in the high school, I probably should have said this too, is 2% short, and those are early ECA kids. That's the 2% that's not in this number right here, so.
So then, am I trying to make sure that that last week, we had roughly 34% of
Last week?
40.
No, it would have been like 72, or, 70-some percent, yeah. We were about 20% in, yeah. It was actually more close to 80, yeah, yeah. Math is hard sometimes.
I'm just trying to get an idea of roughly what
Right, so last week, prior to the students selecting to come back in, we were closer to, probably closer to 18 to 20% of high school that were in the virtual academy. And really the rest, with the exception of a few students who were on-site 5 days because of IEPs or things like that, the rest were only every other day. So it's quite, it's a jump. It's quite a bit of a jump from that. So we were having about a little bit less than 50% of our kids in high school, in the high schools every other day. It was a little bit less than 50%. Now it's up to 66, so 66.
Mr. LaFerla, I have a few questions.
Sure.
You mentioned that there was a few kids that we brought back from the virtual academy to on-site. Did we have requests in the opposite direction where families didn't feel comfortable with kids going back or having the option and wanting to go into virtual?
We did have those requests. It was not a great amount. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. Less than 20 at a building, like at a high school, for example. And those generally, what we were able to do is we gave them an option to do remote learning for 14 days at a time, and then really relook at that to see if they felt safe coming back and doing that. We will be looking at opening up opportunities for kids to do virtual academy second semester, but just because of scheduling, we can't just move a kid into a virtual academy midstream and mid-semester. So we were able to help with a lot of those kids. We did ask that they return back to school now during this time.
But we allowed kids who were in virtual to go into school. It seems that we're allowing one group of kids to switch their preference while the other group of kids are only being allowed to do it at the 14 days at a time. So I would just ask that maybe we get a little bit more consistent with that. And if we're going to allow kids to switch mid-semester, that it should be able to go back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
I think a lot of it too was case by case, because as you, Ms. Shudak, I was worried about parents wanting to bring their students out of virtual, and they told me that it was case by case, and a lot of what was best for the student. But I understand what you're saying about allowing students, and I'm not sure of the total number. I wasn't aware that we had a large number of kids wanting to go virtual. But if there was, it's something I'd like to sit down and review. So I'll look into that.
Okay, great. And then have we had an increase of staff with concerns back with a higher amount of on-staff or on-site 5 days a week? Are we seeing that increase of, concern? We were all very concerned with the mental health and the wellness of our staff prior, and we knew it was going to be an extra strain for some. Have we seen an increase of concerns brought forth?
I have not. Mr. Milborn, have you received a lot of concern at the HR level from staff members?
We've received I would say our typical amount of conversations with our labor management committee, and but nothing. My inbox hasn't been inundated with concerns of that manner. So.
And I know you did speak to one teacher that did share concerns, and you did have a conversation with that one teacher, correct?
Yeah, and we followed back up with some teachers with accommodations. And we followed back up with some teachers that FMLA is ending right now, or ending in November, and seeing what their next steps are based on their doctors. But I wouldn't have any way to quantify that, Ms. Shudak, at the moment.
Okay.
Any other questions, Jill? Kyle?
No, Mr. LaFerla, I'm good, thank you.
All right, thank you. So, just a couple of questions here. The first is, I see these numbers, are these consistent across all the different schools? I know we have a very different district and it's spread out through quite a few different settings for each building. Is this a good indicator of the different buildings, or is this like
Right.
fairly uniform across the board? I know it's like an average of all the buildings and we don't need to go to every single school building, but is this?
I would say at the secondaries, both the middle schools are similar within 1 or 2 percentage points, and the high schools are similar within a couple of percentage points. So you're not seeing a big difference between ALTJ or Kern Wilson. I can't speak to the elementary.
But I do think that there's some difference at elementary.
Yeah, at elementary, there are a few differences. Like Crescent, almost 100% are back. There's only one student that decided to remain in hybrid. The rest are on site every day. And they vary a little bit from the East End and the West End.
I also know in talking with principals as I've visited over the past 2 days, that a couple of the elementary schools have balanced some classrooms to ensure that we didn't have one classroom larger than the other two or the other one. And that has been, that's allowing teachers to have a voice on that and then working with them. But when you look at this screen right here, I just want to walk you through that again. The students in hybrid, those are the students that come, either twice a week or 3 times a week, and the students that are returning 5 days. Those two numbers make up the difference between the students that are never showing up. So when we look at our students that stay in virtual academy versus the students that are coming either on Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Friday, which I really appreciate Mark and Julie working with John McGreevy to pull this data. This is straight out of our system, off of enrollment. When we're looking at that, what they're seeing is that percent every day. And so we still have students that are not showing up on Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Friday that are in hybrid. So it is not 100%. It is 70 or 80% with still 15% out. And it's different at every building, especially at elementary.
Cool. And then you already touched on my follow-up question that would have been to that was class sizes and following up on that. So that's good. And then are we still planning to do the second planning day in November?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
November 9th.
Yeah, November 9th.
And then that's all for me.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
And Mr. LaFerla, that concludes our presentations.
Thank you, and that concludes our agenda for the evening. Before we adjourn, I do want to thank our teachers and our staff. I think I speak for all of us here when I say that we recognize that there hasn't been much of anything easy about this school year. We appreciate your hard work, your dedication, your commitment to our children. So thank you, and we are adjourned.